Okay, so I've started recording. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here today. This is actually the first official free webinar promoted by EDC Rocks. And for those of you who don't know what EDC Rocks is, this is what I call my company. It's something that I started a couple of years ago. I had no idea it was going to be called EDC Rocks, to be honest. A lot of people actually don't know how to pronounce it. They say Ed Crocs. So don't say that, please. It's EDC because it's English Development Courses. That's how it started. And then it became Education Development Courses, and then EDC for short. And, it's something that it was kind of like a parallel project, something that was running on the side because I've always been employed, right? I was always working for someone and I never really had the time to do my own thing. So this event marks my transition to the freelance consulting world, let's say. And that's why I'm starting to promote some free stuff for people to get to know my work, to understand what I've been doing. And of course, for me to always push myself a little harder. So this is my website. If you want to know more about the work that I do, hopefully you will find all of the information you need here. You will find information about my book, my course. I actually have a bunch of courses. I'm still working on getting everything online asynchronously so you can do them on your own time, your pace. That's the challenge because, I'm not great at programming and designing websites, and I'm doing that on my own. But I think I did a lot of, I made a lot of progress, right? I do have a blog. So if you come to my blog, you will be able to see, for example, that not only do I have texts about how to, I don't know, match, let's say, or how to use the contributions from neuroscience, psychology, and education so that you can teach more effectively. But also, I try to analyze a lot of very cool things, and I did make available a blog post about the freelance business, and not just that, actually all of the events that I planned taking place within the next months, they're here. So you can go to my blog, edcrocks.com. All of them will provide certificates. So the next one I'm going to do is working with projects. I'm going to talk about PBL. Then I'm going to discuss neuroscience applied to learning. And then I'm going to talk about desirable difficulties. And I also have some live sessions on Instagram, so you can follow EDC Rocks on Instagram. I try to post a lot of things there. Still, I'm behind, I guess. There are people posting things every day, but I try to post every week at least. And this one that will take place, well, this one actually has already taken place. Sorry, going mad with the book, right? I know, sorry, this one is I'm going to do in 10 days, actually. So this is the next one you can watch on Instagram. But enough with that. Let's talk about the no-show grow approach and the owl factor. So for those of you who came here today and you might not know anything about the owl factor is my first and hopefully not the last book. So I wrote a book. I had no idea it was going to be a book, to be honest. The only thing I had up until around 5 months ago was this. That was the only thing I had about this book 5 months ago. I'm not kidding. And I remember that I wrote this down 7 years ago when I was doing a webinar for Brastiço here in my region, in my city, Goiânia. And I was asked by National Geographic Learning to do something different. They hired me to present something on their new materials. And then I said, well, what can be different? And then I decided to focus on resources. And that's how this whole idea came to mind, right there, 7 years ago. And I wrote here, You cannot see it probably, but I did write here, know, show, grow. I actually even wrote K, so know, show, grow. So KSG, 7 years ago. I kept this, I have no idea where I got this paper from, to be honest. I just folded it, I put it somewhere in a drawer, and then I found it a couple of months ago. And I remember that, of course, I went back to it a couple of times throughout the years. I said, maybe I can write a paper, an academic something about this, right? And I started revisiting what I had thought. And guess what? After a couple of months, I had a lot of things written. I said, well, that maybe this can be a book. And then here we are. It is a book now. It's a book with 208 pages or 18 pages, I think. 218 pages, lots of chapters. And I think it's a good book. I think I did a good job. You will be the judge of that. But let's go to my presentation here. And what is the OWL factor? Why do I call it the OWL factor? And why the know, show, grow approach? And how can you use that if you are a teacher, an educator, a school manager, even just somebody interested in education? You don't have to be working in education necessarily to benefit from reading the book, I think. And I wanted to put as much information as possible right there when you look at the cover. So look at the cover of the book, and you will see that everything that I want to tell you is kind of there. It's in plain sight, let's say, right there for you to see. But then you have to understand a little bit. You have to dig a little deeper. So there's the owl, and the owl is a very central symbol of this book, because the owl symbolizes many, many things, especially philosophy and wisdom and learning. And the academic endeavor. So normally when we go to pages related to university or something like that, the owl is the symbol of learning and achieving higher, let's say are getting higher and higher in your achievements throughout academia or something like that. But also the temple. You can see that there's a Greek temple behind the owl. So it has something to do with philosophy and ancient Greece and Socrates, especially, right? And the owl, like I said, symbolizes Socrates and wisdom and philosophy. But there's also steps. I don't know if you saw what I did with the words, know, show, and grow. So there are steps. It's kind of like going up. So you see that know is the basis, is the foundation, and then you have show, and then you have grow, as if you were walking up, the stairs or something like that. And then the same thing, the base of the temple, you have reframing your teaching philosophy, and reframing in the sense of rebuilding maybe, or rethinking, because I think everybody here has a philosophy. There are certain things you believe as a teacher, as an educator, but I wanted to shake those things a little bit with the book to help you rebuild. So sort of building your own temple, your Greek temple, so that you can reflect on the things that you do. And it's not only based on, theoretical, philosophical things, but I think I was able to add a lot of practical stuff in the book as well. So you will see at the end of the 3 main sections, know, show, and grow, that you actually have ideas and resources for you to know, to show, and to grow. But okay, let's look at the sequence of this webinar. So the first thing that I will address here really is, where does it come from? Why the OWL factor? So how did it happen? And then I'm going to focus on the idea of resources, because this is one of the central pillars of the book. And then I'm going to go through the 3 main stages of this approach: know, show, and grow. And finally, the conclusion. And hopefully, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to ask them. Not just at the end, you can add them to the chat box anytime. So the OWL factor origins. It was in 2015 at the Brastiço conference here in Brazil, in my city. It was actually not a big conference, it was a local conference. And I was called to introduce the new material that National Geographic Learning had just published. And if you are like me and you've been to a lot of different sessions, different events, normally when people show a new book, they do the exact same things. They just open a book, they do a walkthrough, they show you the digital resources, right? They show the chapters and all of that, right? Or the units, it's basically the same thing. I wanted to be different. I wanted to focus on potential. That was the word I wanted to focus on. So there was, this group of teachers, me, we were all together in this room, and I had this book in my hand, a National Geographic Learning book. First of all, National Geographic is an amazing resource. Think about it. It's an institution that has been around for over almost 150 years, if I'm not wrong. And they've produced a lot of things. They have an amazing portfolio of photography, photographs, like the best in the world. They have an amazing portfolio of videos, of documentaries, like the best documentaries ever about anything. So that in itself is a wonderful resource, right? But this book in particular added another great resource that I always liked, and hopefully someday I will be there with those guys. TED Talks, TED Talks. So there you have it. National Geographic Learning portfolio, the National Geographic Learning photography and videos, documentaries, plus TED Talks. And TED Talks graded and adapted according to the level of the book. So, I used TED Talks years before National Geographic Learning decided to put them in the book. So I had to watch everything and prepare everything. So everything was ready for me in the book. And I said, this is exactly what I wanted to know. If I were the teacher, deciding whether to adopt the book or not, this is exactly what I need. I don't care about anything else because, the sequence, the units, they're pretty much the same when you look at different books, right? But the resources inside the book and what the book is based on, that's the thing that I wanted to know more about. And I decided to focus on that. I was talking to school managers, and then I said, think about the tools that you can use that you can find in this book. And then I kind of shifted, I turned their attention to something else, like the potential, like how this book can help my students learn more effectively because of the potential of the different resources that you have access to. And then that's when I started thinking of the word resource, right? And then I started digging, and I said, I need to explore this a little bit more when I was preparing the talk, right? What is resource? And I started looking for some definitions. So I actually checked the dictionary, and it says that a resource is a source of supply or support, an available means. Great. So it's very vague, actually. It could be anything. A resource can be anything, really. And then if you look at the Cambridge Dictionary, it says that it's a useful or valuable possession or quality of a country, organization, or person. Again, very generic, right? And then I started thinking, but that's exactly what a resource is. It's anything that we use to accomplish anything. So as teachers, think about all of the resources we use all day long, right? Nowadays, because of the pandemic, we've been teaching online. So we use computers and the internet and the camera and the microphone. When we were in the classroom, sometimes we had access to an interactive whiteboard. So very digital, techy. Sometimes we had access to a whiteboard, and a marker. Sometimes we had access to a blackboard like this one behind me and chalk. And we also have access to books. They are resources. But our voice is also a resource, right? Without our voice, we cannot communicate the things we want our students to learn. But so is their pen and pencil and notebooks. Think about it, Post-its, everything is a resource. All of the things that we use to help our students learn. They're tools, they're means to an end. And the end is the learning experience. Learning itself is the end. And that's when it hit me. Okay, so we have resources. Anything can be a resource, but why do we need resources to teach and for the students to learn? What are the main or the most essential phases or stages of the learning and the teaching process? And that's when I came up with the No Show Grow. And I was very lucky that they rhymed. So there are 3 words and they have the same amount of letters, 4 letters, and all of them end in OW. So it was a coincidence. And again, I embraced this coincidence and I said, this is exactly why we need resources. We need resources to know stuff. As teachers, if we want to know things that are important for us to teach our students, we need to know those things through resources. And how do you know things? You read a book, you watch a webinar, you take a course, right? You need resources to know. Your students also know something. They have their prior knowledge and they have their own resources to know the stuff that they do know. So know is the basis, the foundation of the No Show Grow approach, right? But then if they know something, you know something, but nobody shows anything, then nobody learns anything. There has to be a point, there has to come a time in this learning, teaching experience where you show something and your students show you something in return. That's how you make whatever you know available, evident, obvious to your students so that they can learn from that. So again, I started working on this analogy, and that's how I got to the No Show Grow. But then why the owl? Why the owl? The owl just came back to me a couple of months ago when I got this piece of paper with my notes and I said, okay, so what am I going to call this book, right? Back at the event 7 years ago, I remember thinking of, okay, the coincidence, they all end in OW. And OW could be an acronym or something for my participants, the teachers who watched my session, to remember, the No Show Grow thing that I had created. And then I started thinking, okay, OW, what is that? Wow, can it be like optimal work? I started playing with words, nothing came out of it. And then, 7 years later, when I was working on the book, I don't know, it just hit me. I was thinking about how can this book make an impact? What kind of impact do I want from this book? And people who read the book will have, whoa, this is something interesting. And I remembered something I had learned because of the era of digital marketing and all of the books people have been publishing lately, the wow factor, right? And the wow factor is something that makes you mesmerized, something that really has an impact that you really want to consume, to read, to get, to learn from, right? And that's how it came. So I was, okay, I have the OW, the wow factor, but I'm talking about education and questioning and philosophy and wisdom, and the owl symbolizes all of those things. So it's the owl factor because of the wow factor of education, of academia, of philosophy, of questioning. And, for those of you who started reading the book, I do talk a lot about owls there. I start with owls, I actually end the book with owls. So I find owls fascinating. I think they are incredible animals. And I was really lucky that the analogy worked, everything kind of fit in well, nicely. And again, it's about philosophy. And philosophy is something that can be as large as you want, or it can be very narrow. I think philosophy in the context of the book is really questioning, right? Because we, as teachers, we have certain, criteria that we use and things that we do and replicate because our trainers, our teachers taught us, right? But the owl factor invites you to question those things, because that's what philosophy does. As a matter of fact, right at the beginning of the book, I start with one of the most famous Socrates dialogues, right? A Socratic dialogue. So it's Socrates talking to one of his followers, one of his friends, a person that he held dear. And the name of this person is Alcibiades. and he was a general in ancient Greece, right? And they were, great friends. They had been involved in many ways. And Socrates is asking questions about Alcibiades' expertise as a councilman, somebody who was going to counsel, the people of Athens, the senators, the wise board of members. And this is exactly what I think we should be doing more often with our training. Why do I do the stuff that I do? Where did this come from? Who taught me this? Is this working? If it's not working, where can I find information to change that and adjust the things that that I am doing, right? And Socrates was so annoying asking questions that he got killed because of that. He was tried, he was sentenced to death, and he actually killed himself, according to the accounts of two of his most famous followers and disciples, Plato and Xenophon, right? Socrates didn't write anything according to, historical records, but Plato, he wrote many of the dialogues that Socrates was always talking to people and asking questions, right? But then again, I said, philosophy is great. Philosophy is complex, is higher, let's say, but maybe there's something else I can use as an analogy that connects. And I thought of fables, because I remember growing up listening to those wonderful, marvelous, fantastic stories of animals talking to one another, learning. And there's always a conflict in fables, right? There's always a dilemma. There is a great, I start my book with this fable, the eagle and the owl. So the eagle and the owl, they had been fighting forever because they were eating each other's offspring, the little ones, the little birds. And then they decided to solve what was going on, to solve their situation by saying, hey, listen, this is stupid. Why are we eating each other's, offspring? Why don't we just become friends? And, the world is big. And then the owl tells the eagle that, so you promise not to eat my kids, I will not eat yours. And the eagle asks, okay, but how will I recognize your kids? And the owl says, well, my kids are the most beautiful creatures on the planet, beautiful feathers, you will very easily recognize them. And then one day the eagle finds a nest with, what the eagle says, little monsters, hideous, horrible creatures, and the eagle eats them. And guess what? Those were the kids of the owl. And then when they meet, the owl is very sad because of the horrible tragedy. But the eagle says, it was your fault that I ate your kids, because the way you talked about them and how you depicted them was wrong, because they were not as beautiful as you had told me, right? And again, so this is a very powerful lesson, I think. And the fun fact is that the person who wrote all of those fables, allegedly, as far as we know, was also a Greek person, Aesop, who wrote fables, dating back to maybe 2,000 years. And that's, so a lot of things are basically sending us back to ancient Greece in the book, And I think ancient Greece was the birth of our civilization, if you think about it, Rome and Greece, right? And again, academia and science, because the owl really has a lot to do with reflection, experimentation, and wisdom. So whenever you go to anything related to learning, teaching, university, academia, you might find a little owl as the symbol, right? Now, okay, let's talk a little bit about this then. So what are the 3 stages and how can you apply them? And, hopefully now you will have to read the book for you to, because all of the descriptions and all of the, the techniques, resources, everything, they're there for you in the book. But basically, we start the journey whenever we are going to teach our students and our students are going to learn from us. That's how we start the journey. 2 separate circles, The teacher is a larger circle. because the teacher knows more than the student. The teacher should know more than the student about, of course, what the teacher is going to teach, right? Maybe the students, not maybe, the students definitely know more than us about many other things, you know? But if we are the ones who are going to teach them something, we need to know this something more than they do. So that's why you have two circles and they are isolated. They're not touching at this point because we don't know what each other knows. And that's very beautiful because this is really the imminence, let's say, of knowledge exchange is when we're about to exchange knowledge. It's the teacher plus the student, and then there will be a point that they come closer and they start exchanging knowledge. And remember, I'm building the Greek temple. I decided to use a little bit of Greek architecture as well, you know, to basically classify and categorize the different elements of the Know, Show, Grow approach. And I took one of the most celebrated temples in the world. You can find it in Athens, the Parthenon, right? Parthenon, beautiful. And you have the steps of the Parthenon, you have the columns, and you have the roof. And basically that's the Know, Show, Grow approach. The steps know, the columns show, and the roof grow, because the roof is the top of this beautiful architectural, design, and it kind of gives you the idea that you can reach higher levels, right? So again, I'm using a lot of analogies. I'm inspired by Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek storytelling. All of those things are part of the book. And when you approach the student with your knowledge and the student with their knowledge, there are 4 steps that I think are essential. What is know? Well, me, the teacher, I have to know what my students know so that I can teach them more effectively. I have to know their prior knowledge, right? I have to activate their prior knowledge. I also have to know my students. And this has a lot to do with rapport and establishing a positive relationship with your students. And I also have to know how to teach. And this, of course, involves methodology and training, right? And that's also part of show. But most essentially, I need to know the content. And here the content could be the skill that I'm about to teach. But you can see that there is a logical sequencing here. The content is the largest step because that's the most essential thing. If I don't know the content, how can I teach it, right? So that's the most elemental thing. It's the very first one, the basis for the Krepidoma. Krepidoma is the name that the Greeks gave to the steps of temples, right? So the content has to be bigger. I have to know more about the content than how to teach that, right? Because the content is more vast, unless, of course, I study methodology. So I know a lot about teaching. So maybe the second step would be larger. But I also have to know more about how to teaching possibly than my students, because you need to know all of the techniques, strategies, the different approaches. And you have many students. It's very difficult for you to really get to know your students, but you do have to make an effort. And then finally, you have to know what your students, what they already know, so that you can teach more effectively. If you forget any of those steps, then you are not teaching very effectively. But again, the top steps, the higher steps are a little bit less important than the lower ones, you know. First, you need to know the content, and that's a given, right? And when this happens, when you are exchanging knowledge, when you are showing the content, you're using the right approaches and methods and strategies, right? You know your students. Then there are a couple of resources that you can use to make this happen, right? And I just got 3. I explained them in detail in the book. How do you know anything? Where do you get your knowledge? Where from, right? So you get your knowledge from people. You get your knowledge from your teachers, from your family, from your friends, right? You watch people on TV and you read what people wrote. So you get knowledge from people. Sometimes we get knowledge from dead people, like I got knowledge from Socrates, right? So people share knowledge. But we also get knowledge from places, from being in a certain location and observing what goes around. So we do get knowledge from places. And perhaps even more importantly, we get knowledge from practice and reflection. So practice here means experience, really. I mean, many times you thought I should do this. And then when you tried, when you experimented, it didn't work. So your practice told you that this is not the best way to do something. And you learned something. So you came to know something else because your practice gave you a direction, let's say. So I explain in the book how you can use people, places, and practice to know something, to know better, and also to make your students know how you can use people to teach, to get your students to know something that they need to know. And then, of course, we move on to the show part. And the show has a lot to do with method. So in my book, I basically focus on the idea of method when I come to show. And you will see here that show has two different phases. So there is a moment that those circles that were not touching, so they were not communicating, they have the intention to share something. And then you can see arrows or vectors, like I call them. So the teacher will use, and again, the intensity of the vector, let's say, so how long the arrow is, how it's the more effective it is, because that means you have more power to show, or you have more methods or more ideas, strategies to show, right? So that's why I believe that the teachers should have a longer arrow in most cases, because we are the ones using the methods. Even if we ask our students to do everything hands-on, that they are the ones learning by themselves in a way, but we were the ones who planned that because we understand the method, right? So we have the tools to make this learning or this knowledge exchange more facilitated or more effective, right? And then when we do show, we show something, the students show whether they're learning or not. There is something that happens, something very beautiful, kind of like physics or chemistry. It's called integration in my book. It's when the circles are no longer distant. They have come closer. There was an exchange. And of course, the exchange is never complete, right? I mean, I can never teach everything my students need to know about a particular subject. So the exchange is this area here, this Venn diagram. A little bit of my knowledge will pass on to my students, and their knowledge will pass on to me. We learn from our students all the time, right? So this moment of integration is a very beautiful, very nice, catalytic, let's say, moment, because it's when my students get something from this exchange, and hopefully it's when I get something also. And then that will help me reflect on my knowledge and then change something in the future. So we were talking about the bases, the steps of the temple. Now we talk about the columns of the temple, because if you have no columns, the roof will just fall onto the ground, right? And they will probably destroy the foundation, the steps. So the only way for you to build a temple effectively is if you have very solid and strong columns to sustain the weight of the roof, but also to connect the roof to the steps, right? So if you know a lot, you have the content, but then you don't have the show, you don't have the method, it doesn't work. You're using ineffective methods. You cannot reach the roof, because you're not working with the columns of show. And that's an interesting analogy, because how many of you have had lessons with excellent, amazing researchers at the university, but they didn't have the show part, they didn't have the method, and everything that they were saying probably was, I don't know, forgotten, or you were not interested. So they have a lot of know, but they have very little show. So then they cannot transfer this knowledge effectively from themselves to the students, right? And this is very important for us to reflect. Even though you have a lot of know, your steps are very solid. If your show is bad, is small, if your columns are weak, your students are not going to learn very well because you cannot pass on the knowledge very effectively. And what should you pass on to your students? The content, right? And here I focused on the content because normally the content will turn into skills, and skills can become competencies, right? So the content is really the basis for skills and competencies as well. And you also have to show the relevance of the content, because think about it. How many times have we taught something that the students didn't want to learn because, well, when am I going to use this ever in my life? You know, it's not relevant to them. So you have to show the relevance. And along with that, you have to show the applicability. So, I mean, how they can use that in their daily lives. I'm not saying we should only teach stuff that is applicable always. Sometimes we teach, and we should teach stuff that is, I don't know, for it's an intellectual exercise for them to reflect, you know, maybe it's not applicable, but it's good for their brains. But on the end of the student, one thing you should show, or they should show you, is evidence of learning, right? Because if you follow all the steps of know, and you follow the three first columns of show, but you do not collect evidence that they are learning, like, you know, John Hattie calls it making learning visible, for example. If you don't collect that, then you don't know if they're really learning, right? So this is a very important column. And maybe we don't do that as often as we should, right? But again, this is the show part. There are some resources you can use for show to happen. Those resources that I'd like to show you are, let me stop sharing just a little bit, because I think, oh, I found it. So here are the resources for show. And they are, again, I really try to think of ways to make everything easy to remember. So you can see that I started all of the resources with P, right? So, you know, the know stage was people, places, and practice, right? Now the show stage is participation, presentation, play, projects, and portfolios. Because I really, you know, I hope that this is going to make it easier for you to remember those things. When you go to the book, so I have a whole section in the book here, when you go to the show part, basically explaining, so I explain the columns, and then I also explain the resources. So right here, for example, resources for show, I use dialogues from movies, you know, and TV series to illustrate the point, you know. So I mentioned, you know, the Mona Lisa Smile with Julia Roberts in the book. I think you watched that, great movie. I mentioned the Big Bang Theory, you know, I mentioned Dead Poets Society, for example. So I got some dialogues to illustrate the points. And here, there's a great scene in the Mona Lisa Smile, and I explain participation. And it's Catherine Watson, you know, the character played by Julia Roberts, this arts history teacher. Tough school, first day was horrible, nobody liked her, they knew everything, she was not very prepared. But then the second day, the second lesson, she was extremely prepared. And you can see that they are learning because of their participation. She's asking questions, she's showing different arts, you know, works of art. There are slides and everything. And then she asks questions and they answer. They ask questions, they comment. So participation is a wonderful resource for you to show, and for your students to show that they're learning. So basically what I'm saying is, if there is absolutely no participation in your lesson, nobody's showing anything, how do you know if they're learning, right? I mean, unless, of course, you look at their work. And that's why portfolios are also part of this, right? And projects. And presentation is really one of the most, I'd say, essential parts of show, because we are always presenting. Even when I'm not talking about direct instruction only, only you talking at your students, but you're presenting the page of a book, or you're presenting a resource like a listening activity, right? You're presenting an image or a video. Your presentation is really the foundation, one of the foundations of show as well, because they are presenting their stuff as well. They're showing the things. So when they prepare a presentation in front of the whole class, or when they're trying to make the case in group work, they're presenting something, right? Play is also very important, especially for young learners. We know that we learn through play. And unfortunately, a lot of parents have no idea. They think that play is a waste of time. And we have to teach our parents that play is not a waste of time. We have learned through play for hundreds of thousands of years. So those things are very well described in the book. And basically they give you arguments and ideas for how you can use them. How can I use projects or portfolios and questions for you to reflect on your teaching philosophy, right? So far, so good. Yes, because I'm about to wrap up now. So we're coming to the roof of our teaching philosophy, let's say, or the temple, right, of the Know, Show, Grow approach. I call it, so you can see that I play with the words approach and philosophy. And approach is normally a philosophy. If you read, there are many books about English teaching approaches and methods, like Jack Richards and Rogers, for example, William Renandia. There are many great books, and they all say the same thing, that an approach is a philosophy. It's an ideology. It's a school, let's say. And an approach, it's more like the source of inspiration for you to build your method from, So the approach doesn't tell you specifically what to do, but it gives you the boundaries, the limitations of what you can do, right? And the method is much more straightforward. The method is kind of like a recipe, step-by-step procedure of how you teach. But I play with the word philosophy because philosophy can be much bigger than approach, You can, for example, if you choose to have a multi-approach, let's say, so if your approach is to use different approaches, that could be your teaching philosophy. Because a philosophy is really, something that goes beyond. It's about questioning and, trying to get to the bottom of something. And when we get to the top of the temple, the roof of the Know, Show, Grow approach, I represent that by the circle in expansion. This has a lot to do with Vygotsky, for those of you who remember the zone of proximal development, So it's your potential for growth, because when we are exchanging knowledge, showing, using different methods, that means that we are incrementing our potential, or it becomes exponential in a way. We are growing. And I compare that to a physical reaction or a chemical reaction, like think about nuclear fission or something like that, like a tiny particle that explodes or something like that, or a chemical reaction that you have two elements, two substances, and then when you put them together, there's growth. There's a catalyst that makes them grow. And that's what happens in the teaching learning environment. We come closer to our students, we exchange knowledge, and we grow, so it's like a chemical reaction. So what do you grow? What are the four elements of grow? And here represented in the roof of our temple. First of all, the thing that supports all of the roof, synapses. And this is very neuroscientific. The only way you can grow learning is by growing synapses in your brain. I mean, we learn, every time we learn something, we are modifying or we are increasing neural networks. And that means that we are making new connections. If we are making new connections, we are creating new synapses. Without this property of the brain, we couldn't learn. So that's why it's very important for you to understand a little bit of, neuroplasticity, for example. But if you are taught by a teacher and you believe that you cannot learn because you don't have the right attitudes and beliefs, you don't have the right mindset, you will not learn very effectively. Carol Dweck has discussed the idea of growth mindset. So you can grow your mindset as well for you to learn. In the process, you can also grow your repertoire. And repertoire, basically your tools, your attitudes, and anything that you use to help you get somewhere, right? Your experiences. This is very important. And finally, and I think maybe we don't talk about this enough in education, what we're trying to do really as English teachers or any teacher, we're trying to grow our students' capabilities. And I like this word because it's very, very broad, right? What capabilities? Linguistic capabilities, yes, but also behavior, and also their chances of getting a job, right? Isn't that what we're doing? We're trying to grow our students' capabilities, and that's the tip, the highest part of the roof of our temple, because this is the end goal. They come to our lessons, to our class, to our course, because we want them to become better human beings, to grow their capabilities. And if we achieve that, so mission accomplished, right? What are the resources? And here they are based on social and cognitive psychology. The resources for you to help yourself grow, but especially your students grow: passion, perseverance, and purpose. Again, they start with P to help you remember, and they're based on the notions of growth mindset, of intrinsic motivation. They're also based on Angela Lee Duckworth's book, Grit, which is a great book. It has a lot to do with growth mindset as well. But passion for learning, which is a new trend nowadays, passion for learning and changing and lifelong learning, those are things that are embedded here. Perseverance is really focusing more on the effort that you need rather than the talent, committing more than thinking that you will have everything you need. You're talented enough or intelligent enough, right? And purpose, it's not just your own purpose as a learner. I want to learn English to do this or to get there, but really the purpose of your community. Like, how am I going to give back? The contribution, let's say, right? Daniel Pink discusses purpose. He says that we want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that's the basis for intrinsic motivation. And I talk about him. I talk a little bit about his book in my book as well. And that's it. And then at the end of the book, this is what you get: the whole temple with all of the elements, So the base, the steps, the krepidoma, as the Greeks call it, that's the know part, right? And you have the elements from the columns, that's the show part. And you also have the elements of the roof, and that's the grow part. Now, if you remove any of those elements, especially if you remove the whole section, if you take the steps away, the columns are going to fall. They will be built on very weak foundations. The whole thing will collapse. If you remove the columns, the roof is going to fall onto the steps and everything is going to break and nothing is going to work. If you remove the roof, you are not going to grow because, there will not be any protection over your head, the rain will come in. So everything will basically go wrong. Again, this is why I think the analogy works. It's really going back to ancient Greeks, going back to Socrates, going back to fables, using the owl as a wise animal to help us reflect on our teaching philosophy. And that's what the book is about. All right. Now, thank you very much. I do have a few minutes for questions or comments or whatever. send me an email, follow me on social media, follow my blog and website. You'll find more stuff there. And go to, if you are in Brazil, I can send you a link to buy the book if you didn't, or you can go to Amazon, you can buy the Kindle version. It's on Amazon. I can see that Mari has the book. I know Carol has the book as well. I hope it's a good, interesting read, okay? Now, and I also have a mug. Take a look. This is the Owl Factor mug, huh? So, very nice. So now I'm here for questions or comments or anything. Yes, or no questions. You decide, huh?
I don't have questions, but
okay.
I think the part I read, yes, and everything you told us now shows why it was so difficult to teach in the beginning. It isn't easy nowadays, of course, it isn't. I consider it a very complex activity. Sometimes I try to tell my parents and sometimes to my father. My father is an entrepreneur, he's a very active man, and I say, oh, Dad, I'm so tired. And he doesn't understand because we work a lot. We don't make that much money that we like to, to make.
Unfortunately.
He said, why you're so tired? And sometimes, it's difficult because maybe I was wondering, I think sometimes we don't have all of this structure and it becomes difficult. Then we have to hold something that we don't have.
Every lesson you're teaching, you have to build the temple, so it's exhausting.
Exactly that. Because the students are different. The context is everything is so how to say, unique.
Yes. And people who are not in education, they don't get that. They feel like, I think they have this idea that teaching is very passive, because they were taught that way. So their teachers, they only stood there in front of the classroom talking, and that's all they remember about education, which is, and that's why it didn't work very well. It's so much more than that, right?
And I think it was last weekend that I spent a lot of hours reading the book, and then my classes on Monday, they were different,
See? Okay.
My student told me at the end of the class, wow, this class was amazing.
Oh, great. So it was because of the book, huh? I like it. Wonderful to know. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's about reflecting, what can you do differently? How can you, because if you think about it, many times we just need to cover the lesson, the syllabus, and then we don't think about the resources we have. And maybe your resources, they don't need to be digital. I say that in the book, we have this idea of infrastructure and resources like technology, digital stuff, and sometimes it's your voice or your connection with the students, and that's enough.
That's it.
Great. Okay, so no questions, no more comments. Yes, Maria Cecilia. No. I will save, so it's being recorded. I will upload this to YouTube. You can find me on YouTube, EDC Rocks YouTube channel. And thank you very much. So this was like the official, the first free webinar. All of you will get an email very shortly with your certificate. And remember, why don't you try to read the book a little bit? I think it's a good experience, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everything.
Well, my pleasure, and who knows, maybe this book, again, will really help you rethink your teaching philosophy, right? Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Maria Cecilia. Anna. Okay, Anna, you came in later. Gulshan, thank you very much, everybody. And Carol, I think Carol was here, but that's it. Make sure you go to my website, edcrocks.com. And there is a link to the blog post for you to see the upcoming events, okay? There will be a couple, every month there will be something, so you can participate, all right? And you have to register again. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you again. See ya.